You ever notice how quiet men become before they disappear? Not physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The loud arguments stop, the explanations stop, the late night discussions stop, not because they don't care, but because they finally realize caring doesn't change anything. Right now, millions of men are sitting in relationships where they've become spectators in their own lives, walking on eggshells, filtering every word, swallowing every frustration just to avoid another meltdown, another accusation, another emotional explosion they somehow end up apologizing for. They're tired of explaining feelings that get dismissed and comforting feelings that get weaponized. They're tired of being told to communicate more, only to find out more communication actually means agree with me faster. They're tired of being judged by intentions when they mess up, yet judged by emotions when she does. They're tired of being asked for honesty while being punished for offering it. And society calls them weak for walking away. No, weak men stay and slowly die inside. Strong men leave. But here's the part no one wants to admit. Men aren't walking away because they hate women. They're walking away because relationships no longer feel like partnerships. They feel like emotional employment. Men feel like they're hired to provide happiness, validation, financial stability, protection, therapy, motivation, leadership, and in return, they're told their masculinity is toxic, their emotions are invalid, and their boundaries are controlling. For years, men stayed because they were taught their value depends on being chosen. They believed love required sacrifice until sacrifice became their entire identity and love disappeared under the weight of expectations. Now men are doing something unheard of. They're choosing themselves. They're rediscovering peace in solitude, purpose in work, brotherhood in friendships, fulfillment in hobbies, pride in independence. They're realizing their life doesn't need to revolve around earning the approval of someone who sees them as fixable at best and disposable at worst. The shocking truth? Men aren't afraid of commitment. They're afraid of committing to a system that punishes them for existing while rewarding them only when they agree, comply, and self-erase. The world keeps asking, where have all the good men gone? They didn't vanish. They just stopped playing a game where losing is guaranteed. Part 1. The Silent Exit. It never starts with a breakup. It starts with silence. Not the angry kind, not the dramatic slam door kind, the quiet kind. The kind where a man stops explaining himself because he finally understands it doesn't matter. He stops arguing his side because the outcome is already decided. He stops defending his intentions because he's already been judged. At some point, a man realizes the conversation isn't a conversation, it's a trial where he's the defendant, the evidence is irrelevant, and the verdict is predetermined. That's the moment he mentally checks out. Women often say, if you were unhappy, why didn't you communicate? What they don't understand is that most men did. He communicated for months, maybe years. He tried explaining how certain behaviors made him feel disrespected. He tried setting boundaries. He tried being vulnerable. But every attempt at honesty turned into a lecture about how his feelings were wrong, insensitive, or inconvenient. Eventually, he reaches a point where words feel pointless because no matter what he says, he's wrong for saying it. So he goes quiet. Not because he doesn't care, but because caring stopped changing anything. Men don't leave suddenly, they leave gradually. The real breakup happens long before they pack a bag or move out. It happens the moment arguing feels like self-betrayal. The moment apologizing feels like submission. The moment staying feels like shrinking. He stops trying to be understood and shifts into survival mode. He starts choosing peace over discussion, retreat over engagement. And ironically, women often interpret this emotional distance as proof he never cared. But it's the exact opposite. His silence is evidence of how deeply he cared before he finally gave up. A man doesn't withdraw because he hates the relationship. He withdraws because he hates who he becomes inside it. The version of himself that's always at fault. The version that can't have opinions without consequences. The version that exists to soothe feelings, not express his own. When men finally leave physically, people think that's the moment they were done. But they were done months ago, maybe years. The day they realized they were no longer a partner, just emotional insurance. The day they realized peace wasn't possible with the relationship, but only after it. And here's the twist no one talks about. Men don't leave because they stopped loving her. They leave because they stopped loving themselves in the relationship. When a man finally chooses himself, everyone is shocked. How could he walk away like that? How could he leave without a fight? Simple. He already fought. He fought every day he stayed quiet instead of exploding. Every day he swallowed pain to avoid hurting her. Every day he stayed when leaving would have been easier. By the time he walks away, he's not escaping her. He's escaping the version of himself the relationship required him to be. And once a man tastes peace after years of emotional tension, he doesn't come back. Part 2, the emotional double bind. One of the most exhausting experiences for men in modern relationships is realizing that no matter how they express their emotions, they're wrong by default. And it's not always because the partner is malicious. It's because many men live inside a double bind, a psychological trap where every path leads to blame. He opens up and shares what's bothering him. He's starting an argument, being dramatic, or can't just let things go. He keeps things to himself to avoid conflict. He's emotionally shut down, cold, or incapable of intimacy. He speaks directly and honestly. He's harsh or uncaring. He softens his words to protect her feelings. He's not being real or hiding how he truly feels. He sets a boundary. He's controlling. He tolerates behavior that hurts him. He's weak and has no self-respect. No matter which route he takes, the narrative circles back to one conclusion. He is the problem. This creates a dynamic where the man's emotional life becomes a liability. He learns that expressing how he feels doesn't lead to connection. It leads to interrogation, misinterpretation, or punishment. Over time, that causes emotional withdrawal, not because he lacks feelings, but because expressing them consistently leads to pain. Most men don't shut down because they're incapable of vulnerability. They shut down because vulnerability was used against them. A man who says, "That hurt me," isn't creating conflict. He's trying to prevent resentment. But if the response is blame or deflection, eventually he decides his feelings simply don't matter in the relationship. And once a man believes that, the relationship is already on life support. Here's the irony. Women often say they want a man who is emotionally open, communicative, and expressive. Yet many have never learned how to receive male emotion without interpreting it as rejection, criticism, or conflict. Men don't want to be emotionless. They just want a safe place to have emotions. Most men aren't asking for much. Listen without turning it into a debate. Validate without assuming blame. Let him feel without being told he shouldn't. That's it. Men are tired of relationships where emotions flow one way, where her tears demand comfort, but his tears demand explanation, where her stress excuses bad behavior, but his stress means he's not coping well, where her feelings are treated as truth and his feelings are treated as threats. Eventually, he stops sharing, not because he doesn't feel, but because he finally understands the rule. Her emotions require action. His emotions require justification. At that point, silence becomes self-defense. And here's the part women misunderstand most. When a man stops expressing feelings, it's not the first stage of losing interest. It's the final stage. Once a man learns that peace comes from suppressing himself rather than being himself, he doesn't look for a better conversation. He looks for the exit. Part 3, the moving goalposts. At the beginning of a relationship, things always feel simple. The expectations are clear: be honest, be loyal, be consistent. A man hears this and thinks, okay, I can do that. He shows up, tries his best, puts in effort, and believes that effort earns stability. But over time, he realizes something unsettling. The rules keep changing. What used to be enough suddenly isn't. Being loyal isn't enough. Now he has to prove loyalty constantly. Being attentive isn't enough. Now he has to predict needs before they're spoken. Being supportive isn't enough. Now he has to absorb emotional storms without ever having one himself. What started as mutual expectations becomes an endless checklist with invisible items added daily. He finds himself in a dynamic where every improvement resets the baseline, where doing better doesn't earn appreciation, it just raises the expectation. Yesterday's effort becomes today's minimum standard. This is where resentment grows, not because he doesn't want to show up, but because his effort no longer leads to connection. It leads to more obligation. When he tries to address this imbalance, the response is often some variation of, "I never asked you to do that." But that's not true. Maybe she didn't verbally ask, but she certainly expected it. And when unmet expectations are treated like failures, men stop trying. Not because they're lazy, but because effort without impact feels pointless. Eventually, he realizes he's no longer in a relationship. He's in a performance, a never-ending test he didn't agree to take, where the grading criteria are emotional, subjective, and constantly changing. This moving goalpost effect doesn't just exhaust him, it erodes trust. He stops believing promises like, "I just want you to communicate more," because experience taught him that meeting one demand only unlocks the next. He stops taking feedback sincerely because feedback has turned into pressure disguised as self-improvement. At some point, he recognizes a deeper truth. He's not being asked to be his best self. He's being asked to be a version of himself that only exists to satisfy someone else. And that's not love. That's conditional acceptance. What makes this worse is that men rarely receive grace. When she slips, there's always context: stress, hormones, trauma, exhaustion, just having a day. But when he slips, it becomes a character flaw. He doesn't care. He's not trying. He's emotionally immature. His mistakes become identity. Hers become circumstances. He starts to understand that the relationship offers no stability because expectations are built on feelings, not agreements, and feelings by nature fluctuate. How do you succeed in a system where the standards change based on someone else's mood? You don't. You burn out. And once burnout sets in, men don't fight harder. They detach. Because when the bar keeps moving, you eventually realize you're not supposed to reach it. You're just supposed to keep jumping. Part 4. The risk-reward problem. Men aren't walking away from relationships because they can't handle commitment. They're walking away because commitment has become a risk with almost no guaranteed return. For generations, a relationship meant partnership, shared responsibilities, shared goals, shared sacrifice. A man worked, provided, built a life, and in return he gained stability, family, purpose, loyalty, emotional support, and legacy. Now, many men feel that the obligation stayed the same, but the benefits evaporated. He's still expected to protect, provide, pay, lead, initiate, plan, problem solve, and be emotionally available. But what does he receive in return? Often criticism disguised as standards, emotional labor disguised as communication, conditional intimacy disguised as empowerment. The relationship becomes a contract where he performs and she evaluates. A lot of men have stopped seeing relationships as love and started seeing them as liabilities. Because in the modern landscape, a relationship doesn't just fail emotionally if it falls apart. It fails legally, financially, socially, and sometimes publicly. If a breakup goes badly, he doesn't just lose love. He can lose half his savings, his home, his reputation, access to his children, years of progress, and his mental health in the process. One accusation, one emotional retelling of a story, one court decision, and a decade of work can evaporate. Men notice how quickly a partner who claims to love them can become an adversary backed by institutions designed to punish them. They watch fathers lose custody not because they're unfit, but because they're male. They see friends financially destroyed in divorces that weren't mutual. They see coworkers fired over accusations that never needed evidence. It's not just heartbreak men fear, it's annihilation. When a woman leaves a relationship, she may feel pain, loss, or trauma. When a man leaves, he can feel all that plus legal consequences, public blame, and financial ruin. And yet society tells him he's scared of emotional intimacy, rather than acknowledging he's responding rationally to real, observable risk. Men aren't refusing to commit because they don't value love. They're refusing because they're tired of entering agreements where they absorb almost all of the downside and very little of the upside. Love used to be something men built their life around. Now many men build their life first and ask whether love is worth risking what they built. Often the answer is no, not because they don't want connection, but because peace, stability, and autonomy are no longer guaranteed within relationships. They're often only found outside them. Modern relationships ask men to gamble everything they earn, everything they build, everything they feel, and everything they hope for on the emotional stability of someone who might leave the moment she's unhappy. That's not fear. That's rational decision making. And the irony is that men aren't walking away from love. They're walking away from deals designed to break them. Part 5. The myth of you're nothing without a relationship. From the moment boys become men, they're taught a very specific narrative. Your value is measured by the woman who chooses you. If you're single, people assume something must be wrong with you. If you avoid relationships, they say you're afraid of intimacy. If you focus on career, passions, fitness, purpose, you're running from responsibility. If you prefer solitude, you're lonely and just pretending to be okay. Society has romanticized male sacrifice to the point where a man without a partner is treated like an unfinished product, an engine without a vehicle, a warrior without a kingdom, a paycheck without a home to fund. Men absorb this silently. They grow up believing they must earn love through effort, that their worth is external, validated only when someone else sees it. They hear phrases like, "When are you settling down?" "Real men start families." "One day you'll find someone who makes life meaningful." "Without a woman, you'll die alone." The underlying message? A man alone is incomplete. So men push themselves into relationships not always because they want one, but because they've been conditioned to believe that being loved is proof of being valuable. Then reality hits. Some men give everything, time, money, devotion, energy, and end up more drained, less respected, and further from themselves than when they were single. They lose hobbies, friends, health, ambitions, even identity. Their world shrinks to fit someone else's emotional comfort, and they don't notice until they step outside of it. And here's the moment that changes everything. After leaving a relationship that drained him, a man experiences life on his own terms again, and he realizes he's more fulfilled without being attached. His finances improve, his peace returns, his body transforms, his goals sharpen, his sleep stabilizes, his confidence grows back like muscle memory. He starts to see that the version of himself sacrificed for the relationship wasn't noble, it was self-erasure. And for the first time, he understands, I wasn't desperate for love. I was desperate to feel worthy. Many men realize they stayed in relationships not for connection, but for validation they never needed. Society convinced them that being alone means being broken. But being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, and being partnered and being loved are not the same either. A man who chooses himself isn't avoiding women. He's avoiding situations where he must trade identity for acceptance. As more men wake up to this, the shame campaigns lose power. Who hurt you? Grow up and settle down. You'll regret it one day. No, men regret the years wasted, becoming someone they were never meant to be, just to prove they're good enough for someone who never saw their value until they left. The myth dies the moment a man discovers he can create happiness on his own. Because once a man realizes he is whole by himself, every relationship moving forward must be additive, not a lifeline, not a purpose, not validation. If love doesn't expand his life, it no longer qualifies to enter it. Part 6. What men are choosing instead. When men step away from relationships, people assume they're retreating from life itself. They imagine a man sitting alone in a dark room, depressed, bitter, and defeated, but that's not what's happening. The truth is far more uncomfortable for society to admit. Many men aren't losing anything by leaving, they're finally gaining what they were missing. Because when a man stops pouring his energy into emotional labor that yields no emotional return, that energy doesn't disappear, it redirects. He starts investing in himself. He picks up passions he abandoned years ago. He goes back to the gym, not to impress anyone, but because he finally has the mental space to care about his health. He reconnects with friends he neglected because every weekend used to revolve around someone else's moods, plans, and crises. He starts hobbies he always wanted to try: boxing, photography, coding, traveling, music, combat sports, gaming, woodworking, investments, things that give him purpose, clarity, identity. His life expands beyond being someone's emotional safety net. A man who once spent nights arguing over tone and intentions now spends them building skills, businesses, futures. A man who once worked overtime to fund vacations designed to fix a broken relationship now uses that same money to upgrade his life. Better car, better house, better body, better peace. Men aren't choosing nothing, they're choosing themselves. And here's what society refuses to acknowledge: men are discovering they can experience connection, support, brotherhood, belonging, and fulfillment without romantic relationships. Friend groups, communities, sports teams, online spaces, gyms, clubs all provide emotional value without demanding self sacrifice. Men are learning that friends can give loyalty without conditions, work can provide purpose without manipulation, solitude can bring peace without punishment, hobbies can bring joy without emotional chaos. The old script said, "You need a woman to feel complete." The new reality says, "You can build a complete life first and only let others in if they enhance it." This shift terrifies people, especially those who benefited when men believed they needed relationships to feel whole. Because a man who doesn't require female approval cannot be controlled by shame. Suddenly, insults like, "You're scared of intimacy," "You just can't handle a real woman," "You'll die alone," lose all power because a man who enjoys his own life isn't threatened by being alone. He's threatened by being dragged back into emotional chaos disguised as connection. Men are no longer asking, "How do I attract a partner?" They're asking, "Does having one even improve my life?" That question alone signals a cultural shift. And the most profound part? When men stop needing relationships, they stop settling for toxic ones. They stop chasing women out of loneliness. They stop sacrificing peace for company. They stop dating out of obligation. They become selective, not desperate. A man who chooses himself isn't closing the door to love. He's finally raising the standard for what love must be. Part 7. Done with bad deals, not with women. The biggest misconception about men walking away is that they're rejecting women altogether, that they've sworn off relationships, intimacy, love, commitment, and connection forever. But that's not true. Most men aren't giving up on women. They're giving up on the version of relationships that demand self-sacrifice while offering nothing equal in return. They're finished being therapists disguised as partners, finished being emotional regulators instead of human beings, finished being providers while being treated like backup plans, finished proving their loyalty to people who show none, finished acting like love means tolerating disrespect. Men aren't anti-relationship, they're anti-exploitation. A healthy relationship, one built on mutual respect, peace, accountability, and shared responsibility, will always attract strong men. But those relationships are becoming rarer, not because good men are disappearing, but because women are no longer taught to build them. Many are taught to demand high standards without offering high value, to expect emotional labor while refusing emotional accountability, to see compromise as oppression and partnership as burden. So when a man finally walks away, it's not out of hatred, it's out of clarity. He realizes a future with someone who drains him is far more lonely than a life lived on his own terms. The irony is this: the more men invest in themselves, the harder they become to manipulate. The more peace they experience, the less chaos they'll tolerate. The more they build their own happiness, the less they rely on relationships to feel whole. That's what scares society. Not that men are alone, but that men are fine alone. Because once a man learns to generate his own peace, he doesn't return to environments that threaten it. He doesn't negotiate with disrespect. He doesn't chase validation. He doesn't beg to be understood. He chooses differently. And here's the truth that completes the story. If relationships evolve, if they return to partnership, reciprocity, accountability, the men who walked away may come back, not because they need love to survive, but because love would genuinely enhance a life they already built. But until that shift happens, men are doing something revolutionary. They're opting out of the rigged social contract. They're refusing emotional debt. They're withdrawing from systems that punish masculinity while demanding its benefits. They're no longer offering unconditional loyalty to people who treat loyalty as leverage. A man who chooses himself becomes dangerous, not to society, but to systems built on his silence. He stops asking for permission. He stops explaining his boundaries. He stops apologizing for wanting peace. He stops sacrificing himself for people who wouldn't do the same. Men aren't done with women. They're done with being taken for granted, being emotionally responsible for someone else, being shamed for masculine needs, being punished for setting boundaries, being expected to pour endlessly into people who don't pour back. Walking away isn't failure, it's graduation. Because the moment a man realizes he is whole on his own, everything he accepts from that point forward must honor, not diminish, who he has become. At the end of the day, this isn't a movement built on anger. It's a movement built on awakening. Men aren't turning away from women out of bitterness. They're turning toward themselves out of necessity. They tried to play by the rules. They tried to communicate better, love harder, sacrifice more, be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. And they learned the truth. Effort means nothing when the system is designed to take, not build. Men aren't asking for perfection. They're asking for partnership. They're asking for accountability, reciprocity, stability, respect, peace. And if those things aren't on the table, they're finally willing to walk away from the table entirely. Not every woman is the problem. Not every relationship becomes toxic. But enough men have been burned, betrayed, drained, and discarded for simply trying to love in a culture that treats male devotion as a resource rather than a gift. And now the pendulum is swinging, not toward hate, not toward isolation, but toward self-preservation. Men have discovered they can build fulfilling lives without sacrificing themselves to be accepted by someone else. And that realization changes everything. So the question is no longer, why are men leaving? The question is, what would make them want to stay? If love wants to survive, it has to evolve. If relationships want to thrive, they must return to balance. And if peace is not part of the offer, men will continue choosing themselves. Because the future doesn't belong to men who chase validation. It belongs to men who protect their value. Now I want to hear from you. Are you done with relationships as they are? Or are you still trying to make it work? What was the moment that changed everything for you? Drop your story below, not to complain, not to attack, but to document a generation of men waking up. Share this with a brother who needs to hear it. Send it to someone who thinks you're the problem. Save it for the day you forget why you left. Because this isn't the end, it's the beginning of a new standard.